5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay. Hello, willkommen, konnichiwa, ni hao, jambo, marhaba. Time for the Armist Inquisition yet again. Episode 213 on Sunday, the 2nd of January, 2022. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. Indeed.
What a treat we've got tonight for our first podcast of the year, because we are joined by intrepid explorer of enigmatic ancient sites, Brien Foerster. How you doing, Brien?
Great. Pleasure to be with you.
Thanks for coming on, Brien.
Yeah.
Looking forward to this one for a bit. So, yeah, it's going to be good.
Oh, good.
Now, tell us, Brien, you probably have the best job in the world, one of the best jobs. How on earth did you get to this point? Has this been like a lifelong deal for you, or was there like a catalytic moment, a book you read, or an article, or a documentary? What set you off on this path?
Oh, it was a combination of things. I've been fascinated by ancient places, ancient mysteries since I was a kid. I used to look at National Geographic when I was very young, and the book Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock was a great catalyst in order to draw me into, I think he was the first one to go all over the world and see all of these mysterious places and connect, really connect the dots together. So he was very influential early on. And then my first trip to England, actually, when I was 16, I got to go see Stonehenge.
Nice.
So, quite a bit farther south than where you're located, but that was amazing. There wasn't even a fence around it at the time.
Yeah.
So we were able to walk right up to the stones and touch them and things, which is very different from the situation today. And my first trip to Peru was about 15 years ago, where I got to see the megalithic structures, up close and personal. And I was I was shocked by how incredibly complicated some of these megalithic sites are. So that's what really started me onto this path, I guess.
Yeah, when you say complicated, what do you mean by how complicated they are?
Well, the fact that the stones are in general megalithic, meaning very big, they interlock without any kind of clay or cement or mortar. They're literally interlocking with each other. And in some cases, the quarry for the stone is up to 55 kilometers away. So, transporting multi-ton blocks by the Inca would have been basically impossible. So that's what really drew my first queries and questions about who could have possibly done this kind of work.
Yeah, there's a sort of how did they do it, sort of, because we're told about when we sort of read in books or watch documentaries about these certain civilizations, we're led to believe that they had a certain level of sophistication and technology. And when you, like you mentioned, these massive polygonal masonry walls in Peru, and there's some of the strongest evidence for me that there's something weird going on, because, I mean, they just don't look real.
Mm-hmm.
I think as well, it's the sort of the lack of evidence for sort of the machining and the tooling and stuff, and that's what kind of what the mainstream academia says is the issue, isn't it, with kind of being able to evidence how they were made. And so I suppose it's something I wanted to ask her when we get people on like yourself is, how do you think they actually did it? What's your kind of ideas as to sort of like the tools and the tooling that was potentially able to do that kind of thing?
Well, that's of course the most curious question, because the academics still insist it was copper chisels and stone hammers and wooden wedges, which are, at this point, completely ridiculous. So, been going through different theories over the course of a number of years. And honestly, I think whoever was able to do this was able to literally manipulate matter, make it into a like a marshmallow consistency, transported across the air, and set these blocks into place where they turned from a marshmallow material back into a hardened stone within maybe a thousandth of a second or something like that. I know it's a very much out of the box kind of explanation, but there is no normal explanation that you can come up with that can explain this kind of stuff. It's very surreal.
Well, those like giant polygonal blocks. Was it Nick in our Discord who sent us some photos? He shared some photos with us. He's just got back from your neck of the woods, and he shared some photos, some aerial photos of the Nazca lines, and then that famous wall he took a photo of with there's a little rope in front of it. And when you look at those big blocks, they almost look like they were a jelly, like they were a Jello mold. And you put one down, and then as you add weight on top of it, they almost look like they bow out.
Yeah. No, exactly. And there's a very famous green granite wall in the city of Cusco that's megalithic, and the consistency of the stone it doesn't look natural because, of course, quarrying from any stone from any quarry, you're going to get different bands of minerals and things in it. But the whole wall is completely consistent in terms of its color and shade of green. So it does look like it's been chemically or physically altered in order to get it into that state. You don't see any cracks. You don't see any, like I said, bands of shades of minerals in there. So again, that's why you really have to jump out of the box in order to try to explain how this possibly could have been done.
And have they found the quarry for that green granite? Do they know where it came from?
Yeah, actually, that one's not too far away. It's about a mile away on top of a hill. But unfortunately, during colonial Spanish times, they built churches and things on top of it. So there's no actual physical sign of where the quarry is today. But I know a number of experts who live in Cusco. They've all told me the same thing. But the basalt quarry, which is what most of Cusco is made from, that quarry is 55 kilometers to the south of the city. And since you only had llamas and alpacas as beasts of burden, there's no way that they could have used them to transport, multi-ton blocks like that. There's probably more than 1,000 or maybe 100,000 tons of stone in Cusco from that quarry that was transported, in pre-Inca times.
I suppose as well, is that wall you mentioned in Cusco, is that sort of ruins or is that sort of intact? So it was the potential for there to be actually more blocks there than are actually there now?
Well, it shows three ages and levels of construction. You have the megalithic at the bottom. Right. Then above it, you have Inca repair, because the Inca actually used any stone that was in the area to do the repair work, whereas the original stone wall was all from the same quarry. You can tell by the color of green. And then you have the Spanish colonial, of course, built on top of that.
Mm-hmm. So do the stones get smaller and softer as you go through time then?
Yeah, they get smaller. They don't fit as well. Like the Inca did a relatively good repair job, but then when you get to the Spanish actually covered everything in a kind of gypsum material in order, number one, to have a consistent look, and also to hide the poor craftsmanship that was underneath it. So
yeah, so I was just going to say as well, it kind of points towards I think of what I've heard about in Egypt as well, in that the kind of stonework and the masonry gets worse as you kind of move through time, essentially. Well,
exactly. Like in Egypt, of course, you have the Great Pyramids and all of that, massive complex at Giza, which also, of course, goes underground. Mm-hmm. And that's why we tend to start our Egypt tours in the south, because we spend 4 days on the Nile traveling north, and that's where you go through most of the dynastic construction, which is limestone and sandstone, which are relatively light or softish stone materials. And then when you get to the Giza Plateau, it's a completely different concept and approach of building.
Mm-hmm. because they in the Great Pyramid they incorporated granite, didn't they? Graham Hancock talks in his book about the granite sort of long rectangular blocks that were used in the relieving chambers that were maybe 40, 50, 60 tons a piece.
Yeah, exactly. And all of that stone had to be transported from Aswan, which is at the very southern part of Egypt. So, of course, people are going to say they built barges and transported these giant blocks, on the Nile, but they can never explain where the wood came from to build the boats to start with. So, that's always what they say is they say, anything near the Nile, it was transported, including the 720-ton colossi of Memnon, which is one piece of stone that actually came from Cairo because it's made of quartzite. It's not granite.
Quartzite. Now that sounds like a hard stone to work with.
Yeah, it's almost pure quartz. So it's 7 out of 10 on the hardness scale.
And how heavy are the colossi?
Well, there's one that's still relatively intact, and it weighs 720 tons on a base, and it's one piece of stone on a base which is at least 350 tons.
It's just wild, isn't it?
And one wasn't enough. They had to do it twice.
You always want two, don't you? Especially if the first one's nice.
Yeah, the air and the spare.
Yeah.
I mean, the same goes for these giant obelisks. I mean, we're talking about Egypt now, so the same goes for the big obelisks that were transported. I mean, the Romans were pretty good at moving sort of big granite stuff, weren't they? But I guess we're talking like there's like a 2,500 year gap between.
Well, at least.
Yeah. Well, going off the
the
what would you call it? The conventional chronology. That there's roughly 2,500 years between the Romans and the construction of the pyramids. I don't know. Would the conventional Egyptologists say that the dynastic Egyptians used the same techniques as the Romans did a couple of millennia later? Would that be their explanation?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, when you go to the Aswan quarry, which is where there still is a 1,200-ton obelisk that was never actually completed, they show you this 10-minute video clip, that the Egyptian authorities made, where they show an animation of how the obelisks were, of course, cut from the quarry, moved to the Nile, moved onto this giant barge, transported to the location where they were supposed to go to, then dragged across the sand, I guess. And then they built like an enclosure. They would raise the obelisk up horizontally, fill the pit with sand, and then let the sand out. And then the obelisk was supposed to gently drop down, and then they would push it up and make it, stand up. And of course, as you said, the Romans were able to move. There's the famous one that's at St. Peter's in the Vatican. And of course, one was transported to France, one was transported to New York City. There's one in London called Cleopatra's Needle. There are more obelisks outside of Egypt than in Egypt at this point.
So the video you just described, they didn't show the Egyptians using cranes like the Romans would have done. No, they don't. That's a very good point. Because that's a huge sort of advantage as far as leverage, and I'm pretty sure the ancient Greeks probably came up with similar sort of techniques. They were good at maths and geometry and stuff, weren't they? But as far as the Egyptian authorities, they don't seem to invoke some sort of fulcrum mechanical advantage other than just piling up loads of sand and dropping it in. Yeah, basically, I've never seen a diagram of the Egyptians using any kind of crane. And of course, what kind of scale of crane would you have to be able to move something that was 400 or 500 or 1,000 tons? But that's where their whole paradigm and story is falling apart, because they come up with these
what are becoming very corny answers to complicated questions. And I guess people are still gullible enough to believe them, but anybody who has half a brain can see that we're definitely missing major parts of our history that, Graham and I and a bunch of others are trying to unravel.
I remember years ago looking into what our modern cranes can do today. And as far as I can remember, the heaviest modern cranes could lift was about 1,000 tons. But these were shipping cranes, so they were on at ports, and they were static, and they were just for lifting up a ship and dropping it down again. They weren't portable. They weren't portable. It really does make you think. I mean, it was done. It's been done. Someone did it, but there's just so many holes in our sort of conventional explanations, isn't there?
The methods missing, and the.
Yeah, it does make me think that there is something, like you mentioned about matter and how we think about matter, and I wonder about sonics.
Well, I was just going to say, about sort of sonics and sacred
geometry.
Yeah,
frequency.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, whether they had something. It's almost as if they had something, not necessarily technologically advanced. That's the wrong word, but an advanced understanding of our reality, which enabled to create these feats. What does that sound plausible, Brien?
No, definitely. The more that we're looking at this, the more it looks like frequency and vibration were involved. Levitating or neutralizing gravity had to have been involved. Literally moving stone through the air, is very, very plausible, though we can't explain how it was done. But it's just the logistics and all the complicated aspects of trying to even replicate this today, which of course is what everybody tries to say. Like, could we do this today? Some of it yes, some of it no. Some of it is beyond our capability, and you're talking about it. The responsible cultures being of a Bronze Age level of technology. It's become really, the conventional stories become absolutely stupid at this point. So that's why I do what I do. That's why I make my videos, is to be in the field and show people, that I'm actually there filming this stuff. And, we've had thousands of people come with us on tours in Peru and Bolivia and Easter Island and Egypt and other places. And not one of them has been able to swallow the conventional story. They all leave at the end of a tour, with a very numbed mind because of so much information their brain is trying to process.
Go on.
No, I was just going to ask, as we were just talking about Egypt, I wanted to ask about, I'm probably going to absolutely butcher the name of this pyramid. Is it called Abu Rawash? And I kind of remember watching one of your videos about it, and you kind of saying that it may have exploded or something like that.
Yeah, it's a very strange place. It is called Abu Rosh or Abu Rawash, and the two explanations for it are either it was a pyramid that was under construction that never got finished, or, well, actually three explanations: or it exploded, or it had been finished and then quarried. But it's in a location where you need very special permission. It costs, I think, $3,000 to be able to visit the site. Most of the most curious locations we go to now are places like that are off the beaten track and require a lot of paperwork and a lot of money to see. But when you have a big tour group with you, like 40 or 50 people, it's quite, it's not that expensive per person.
Why does it cost so much? Is it just because there's interest there and you see it as a...
Well, the previous head of Supreme Antiquities, Mr. Zahi Hawass, he was responsible for covering up a lot of these ancient places because you had to go through him personally in order to be able to visit them. So the new head of the Antiquities actually tuned into the idea that if you charge extra money, then like $2,500 or $3,000 for a 2-hour visit, then you can get small groups to be able to see things that otherwise are not allowed. And so every time I go back to Egypt, there's another site that's been opened to us because of this special permission thing. And one thing I especially do when I'm there is when I film places I've never been to before, I never put any of it on social media while I'm in Egypt, because I have been told that some of the Egyptian authorities monitor my activity. So I make sure that I don't post anything major until I get back to Peru, and then, you know, they can't touch me. But there's a lot of control in Egypt over stuff like this. But the new head guy is good as compared to the people who have been in charge in the past. So good for us and for him.
Yeah. Ben from Uncharted X was telling us about the Labyrinth at Harare.
Yeah.
Have you had a visit there yet?
I've been there once. We're actually going back in March. So, you know, there's stories that there are like 3,000 rooms underground or something like that. But unfortunately, what happened is when they built the Aswan High Dam, the Soviets or the Russians did that. It caused a lot of flooding, like underground flooding. So there's no way to be able to access the labyrinth if it exists. There's a little pyramid that you can walk halfway down into, but then you're hit with a giant pool of water. So whether it's real or not, supposedly, I think it was Herodotus recorded that it existed like 2,000 years ago. But yeah, it'll be interesting to go back there for a second time. It's always, you know, most of these places I've been to many times, but places like Hawara are kind of off the beaten track. So it's something you save, you know, for a special day.
Yeah.
Just going back to the construction methods again, something I wanted to ask you about was the potential for some of these stones in various places having special qualities like conductive qualities or magnetic qualities. Is this something you've looked into?
Oh, definitely. Well, most of the megalithic work is out of hard stone, so basalt or granite, and they tend to be quite high in quartz crystal, and in the case of basalt, also pretty high in iron content. So, of course, iron is magnetic. And then, of course, we have the very strange location of Pumapunku, located in Bolivia, and it is comprised of two types of stone. One is red sandstone, which is neutral to magnetism, and then another material, stone called andesite, which is very highly magnetic. So if you take a compass to that location, the compass goes crazy on certain stones. Like there's no consistent aberration. It depends on which stone you're focusing on and your approach to it. So the famous H blocks are highly magnetic, and nobody's been able to explain that. Standard academics don't even know that anomaly exists, as far as I know. So that's something that I and Ancient Aliens and Ben of Uncharted X and people like that have been looking at.
What are the H blocks made out of?
That's the andesite material.
Right. Did you say that was the one that's high in iron?
I'm not sure if no. Actually, basalt is high in iron.
Oh, basalt. Right. It's very interesting. I mean, to me, those H blocks, they almost look like they were poured or cast. To me. What's your thinking on the construction method for them?
Well, they do look like they're cast, but the important, you know, and there are lots of theories about that they made up a big wall or something like that. But when you go and measure them, each one is actually unique. They're not all of the same dimension.
Wow.
So each one is a one-off. So that blows the theory that they were, poured or a geopolymer or something like that. So again, it simply adds to the mystery of the location.
Oh, right. So you're saying they would have had to make an individual cast for each H block for them to have been poured, which just doesn't seem practical.
Well, and of course, there's also the theory that the Great Pyramid also is geopolymer. In that case, you have 2.3 million stone blocks of each one is a unique shape. So you'd have to have, 2.3 million forms made out of some kind of material, and plywood wasn't in existence.
It's a lot of trees, isn't it?
Yeah, quite a few.
Now, I mean, I think there's two different sort of things going on. I mean, as far as the pyramids are sort of less enigmatic to me in that because they're smaller blocks, maybe a couple of tons each, and they're a relatively softer stone in limestone, whereas the sites you're talking about, like Pumapunku, these are granite, and basalt, which are nearly as hard as you can get. It's almost like there's two different stories going on there. I don't know. Do you think they're related? Do you think the people who built Pumapunku are related to the people who built the pyramids?
No, I don't think so. I think we're looking at least three different ancient civilizations, because Egypt, pre-dynastic Egypt, it's all very logical. It's all very left-brained. It's all very linear. Then you get to Peru, where it's polygonal, and it's more of a right-brained, playful, artistic way of approaching things. And then Pumapunku, you have just astonishing levels of precision, almost laser flat surfaces. So I think you're talking of at least three different civilizations for those three locations. And then you have Easter Island, where you have, of course, the giant Moai figures. Some, were up to 40 feet tall. And I think that, again, was a different civilization again. I think you can draw some comparisons between Baalbek in Lebanon and Egypt, because it seems to be a relatively similar construction style, like, again, linear, massive scale. And even there's some sites in Saudi Arabia that you're allowed to visit now, which look very similar to the way that Baalbek was constructed, and to some degree Petra in Jordan.
You've got to, now, for people who are uninitiated about Baalbek, just tell people about Baalbek and the Trilothon and what's going on there.
Well, Baalbek is located in what's called the Bekaa Valley, or Baka Valley, about 3-hour drive outside of the capital city, Beirut. And I mean, it's a surreal location. The bus took us first up to where the quarry is, which is about a mile from the Baalbek site itself. And there you have, I think, a 1,200-ton block of stone still attached to the bedrock. And, I literally said, holy F, when I saw it for the first time, because seeing pictures of it is one thing, but seeing it in person, it's beyond belief.
Yeah, you could ski down it, couldn't you?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the Trilothon, which is a series of 3,000-ton blocks which perfectly interlock with one another. I've been there twice, and they've opened up the entire site of Baalbek now to the public. So you have massive walls of blocks of stone weighing between 400 and 800 tons, all presumably coming from this quarry. Again, the conventional explanation of how this stuff was cut and transported makes no sense whatsoever. So it's another location where you see three construction styles. You have the megalithic at the bottom, then you have Roman on top, which is smaller and not as well done, and then you have a medieval fort on top of that. So you have three different levels of construction, getting worse as time goes on.
Now, the conventional story is that the Roman, there would only be two, I'm guessing, isn't it? Because the conventional archaeologists, historians say the Romans built the whole temple complex, and then the medieval layer was on top of that.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, it took us three hours to reprogram our local guide, because she kept saying that the Romans did all of it. And, again, you say, how about this 1,000-ton block? How was it moved? And she didn't have any explanation, but her explanation for why the Romans did it was to impress the local people.
I mean, this is what blows my mind about Baalbek is the Romans were very pragmatic. Why use a 1,000-ton block? Is 100-ton blocks not hard enough? I just don't get. It's the why that gets me.
Yeah, that's one of the most important questions. Why would you bother to go to that scale? Just the logistics again of cutting something that size and transporting it and setting it into place with such incredible precision. Luckily, the foundation area wasn't damaged by the Romans at all. So you could walk up very close to where this big row of 800-ton blocks are, and you can see they fit perfectly together. Like there is not an area where you can fit a piece of paper in where the joins are. So that's, again, how could anyone achieve that?
One of the arguments used by conventional archaeology is that there was some Roman column drums, I think, used underneath the Trilothon.
What's that?
I think one of the conventional arguments that the Romans put the Trilothon blocks in is that some Roman column drums were found in the wall beneath the Trilothon. And I believe, doesn't Graham Hancock suggest that this is repair, possibly by when the not Islam, Catholic Romans? No, after the Romans, that it was a repair job. Can't remember.
Well, it definitely looks like it was a repair job. That would be my explanation for it. Again, these sites are pretty complicated. You have to have a pretty keen eye, which most people don't have, to look at this stuff. But when you've had, several years of experience of going to these locations, you get more and more insight into how you think they were built, what you think would have been a later repair work. And it definitely looks like the smaller blocks were put in as an afterthought by somebody who was not the original builder.
Why do you think there is the stone left in the quarry? And I think isn't there a second stone been discovered in the quarry as well? Yeah,
there's a bigger one. So I think it was Russians who recently went there 3 years ago, and they fully excavated the stone of the pregnant woman. So now you can't climb on top of it. You used to be able to climb up from the bottom, but now they've cut all that earth out, and so it's it looms above you. And then next to it, there was just this flat surface, and some of the local archaeologists excavated one corner down to the bottom, and they estimate that one's 1,600 tons, and there could even be bigger ones there too.
Jeez.
But I mean, why do you think they're still in the quarry? Have you any hypothesis as to why that would be? Something must have happened for them to be left in the quarry.
Oh, you still there?
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear Brien? Hello?
Hello?
Hi, Brien.
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
All right. Don't know what happens. Dodgy internet, probably. Do you have a hypothesis or any clues, guesses as to why those stones would have been left in the quarry? What do you think might have happened?
I think there was a sudden cataclysmic event that stopped activity. That's what we see in Egypt. That's what we see in Peru. Like an enormous force suddenly struck all of these locations, maybe at the same time, and just simply stopped the construction. It could have been very high heat, which would have vaporized any organic life. So any plants or animals or people that were there would have been literally vaporized. We see lots of heat damage at locations like the Colossi of Memnon and Karnak and other locations in Egypt and in Peru and Petra in Jordan. So that seems to have been what, there's growing scientific evidence that that's what happened.
Are they looking at the exterior of the exposed bits of the stone? Is that showing signs of extreme heat stress? I don't know whether that would even show on material of this sort.
Yeah, you see, especially on the western surfaces, you see at Petra, you see that the stone has been like blackened surfaces, like it's been melted. At Karnak, it's all on the western side. in Peru, it's all on the western side. So it's like something, it looks like something came from the sun.
Wow.
So it's this kind of along the lines of like what Robert Schoch was saying around sort of massive geostorms and things like that.
Like a huge CME.
Yeah.
CME.
Ah, amazing.
Is that your thinking that this is probably coronal mass ejection? Right.
I think it could very well be. I wrote a book called Aftershock where I look at all the theories of ancient devastation, all happening at the same time, all between about 13,000 and 12,000 years ago, which of course Graham Hancock and many others go into in great detail.
Mm.
And of course Robert Schoch's work, all the same timeline, which is really quite curious, all just, again, a little bit older than the destruction of so-called Atlantis.
Yeah, from Plato's account. So, I mean, how does this play in with the Younger Dryas? Do you think that it's possible for CMEs and Younger Dryas impacts, or one or the other, or what's your view on that? Because there's a lot of scientific papers been written over the last 2 decades about potential comet impacts into the North American ice sheets that could have caused this civilizational reset. But you seem to be swinging towards Robert Schoch and coronal mass ejections. So do you think it's a bit of both?
Oh, I think it was definitely both. I think it was such a massive series of events that happened. There's also the theory that the emissions of energy from galactic center happened at the same time,
Gamma ray
and
bursts.
that was the trigger of the whole thing. That ejection of from the black hole at the center of our galaxy happened. That went across the galactic plane. That could have gone straight through the sun, and that could have triggered the plasma ejections from the sun, and then capturing comets along the path and having them, whack different planets and cause change in axis of different planets and things like that. So I think it was a whole series of events that happened over the course of around 1,000 years.
Amazing.
Not a good time to be around.
No.
It's a miracle any of us made it. How do you think Göbekli Tepe plays into this?
Well, Göbekli Tepe is interesting. I've been there. Technically, it's not that well done. So, it's been carbon dated as the oldest known series of structures. But when you're pretty up close to the stones themselves, it could have been done with hand tools. You're looking at a pretty large scale, like 20-ton pillars.
Yeah.
The quarry is supposedly right there, so it's not a big deal to move them. So, it's curious because it's been radiocarbon tested at that time period, which is very curious, but it doesn't show the level of precision that we see in these other locations we've been looking at. And of course, they've only supposedly excavated something like 1/30th of it, and the Turkish government don't plan to do any more excavation. So,
I mean, it sort of plays into the idea that Göbekli Tepe is the restart, shortly after this cataclysmic event that maybe lasted 1,000 years or so, that, you describe, you've seen these blocks up close and personal, and you can compare them to Pumapunku and the Assyrian and all these other places, and you think, well, this looks rough in comparison. I mean, that does suggest that this is the reset rather than, something along the lines of what you see in Egypt. Would you concur?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. It looks like, and the chronology seems to state that Göbekli Tepe was probably the first large complex created after the series of cataclysms. It was like the restart of civilization again. But again, you go to the museum there and it's, they think hunter-gatherers did all of this work. And
yeah.
you'd need a very coordinated group of engineers and architects and builders to be able to do something on that scale. The fact that the Turks won't let any more excavation is very suspicious. But yeah, it's of no, it's impressive. For me, it's impressive to see once, but it's not that enigmatic to me as compared to all of these other places we've been discussing.
Yeah, I mean, it suggests to me that they had help from, you mentioned the organization, the engineering knowledge. If you think about, this is shortly after this massive cataclysm, there's going to be few survivors. The ones that have been struggling. For them to gather together, create a civilization, create the agriculture and therefore the surplus in food supplies to be able to have dedicated tradesmen, craftsmen, masons and all the rest of it. It does suggest to me that they had help from the outside, from people from the before times, the antediluvian people. That's what it fascinates me, that this could actually be real. That this could be, it's sort of part of our story, our shared history, our shared, where we come from. And there's just so many massive holes in it. If you read a bog standard history book that just doesn't want to entertain these questions, it doesn't want to look at it because, there's so many vested interests in careers and short-term thinking and all the rest of it.
Yeah, well, that's why, again, I'm glad that there are a number of us now who are creating YouTube videos. We mentioned Ben previously of Uncharted X. He produces brilliant documentary style works. He does have a background in engineering, and so he comes from a technical background. Then you have quite a few others. There's Johanna James, who lives in London. She's been producing some great stuff. And Bright Insight, who's Jimmy Corsetti. Yep. He's produced some very good things. So I'm very encouraged by the younger people coming up and exploring. I've been fortunate to be able to influence some of these people, and of course, all based on older, brilliant people like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson and, Robert Schock and Christopher Dunn, and, the list goes on and on. But it's very warming that there are more people catching on to this. They're not buying the party line anymore. More and more of the people pushing the old paradigm are probably retiring anyway, which is a good thing. So I'm very encouraged by, with the future and with what we've been able to uncover so far and what there still is to be able to show to the public in the future.
It's great we've maintained our sort of inquisitive nature or increased it almost with the younger generation. I think that is very positive for perhaps, answering some of these questions in the future.
Yeah, and, YouTube provides a platform, usually.
Yeah.
YouTube is a great tool as long as you're not too controversial or you don't. Mm-hmm. This is what's so dangerous about the situation we're in now with censorship online and how we have to put certain videos on other platforms because this is the world we live in and politics comes into it. And we don't want to see these sorts of censorships escape into other fields such as alternative history. We're already getting it for alternative medicine, alternative science, and this is the danger that we have to be aware of because what you do is great, Brien, and for people who maybe don't have the means or they don't have the time or maybe they're like B.A. Paracas and they're scared of flying, for them to be able to go to your YouTube channel and see these things up close and personal in HD and the drone footage and everything, it's incredible. It's an incredible utility to have.
Yeah, it is. I'm not concerned about being banned from YouTube, though it could very well happen at some point. If it does, then that's the story. But so far, I haven't had any strikes or anything from YouTube. So, no. And I never get into politics. So I just look at the technical stuff that we look at and say, I don't tend to theorize too much either. I just like to show what there is and say, what do you think? And most people think, I have no idea who did that.
Yeah.
Brien, we can't let you go. We need to talk about the skulls.
Well, I was just about to say exactly the same thing. Yeah, we haven't even talked about elongated skulls yet.
No, yeah, because you are the skull guy, the elongated skull guy, Brien. What's going on with these elongated skulls?
Well, nothing much new about that because of the last 2 years of problems we've all been having. But I would say the latest is that we know that the skulls of Paracas, Peru, which is where I'm located, were not Homo sapiens sapiens. We can, a lot of medical doctors are backing that up. There are morphological differences that show that they couldn't have been Homo sapiens sapiens. They were probably a subspecies. That's proven by the mitochondrial maternal DNA. It looks like they migrated possibly from the Black Sea because only 2 of the skulls, of the most ancient skulls that were able to do do DNA testing, were Native American in ancestry. So you're looking at a very complicated picture. And very recently, 2 of the skulls had their nuclear DNA tested, which is the paternal side, and there was no match with anything human. Jeez. So they're just becoming more and more obscure as time goes on.
And when I was kind of watching your videos, you kind of mentioned as well, there's a difference between sort of manipulated skulls and then this other kind of maybe subset of a human species or whatever. You see like what the differences are between the two?
Yeah, the cranial volume is larger. The oldest skulls appear to be natural in shape because I've seen a couple of fetuses where the skull is the size of the body. So there's no way that that's cranial deformation. That's obviously genetics.
Is that the kind of mainstream view then, that it is cranial manipulation, like binding?
Mm-hmm. That's the mainstream view, yeah.
Yeah, binding did happen. Binding happened in almost all the cultures involved. But the earliest Paracas skulls from the coast of Peru here, they genetically were different. Also, the foramen magnum, which is where your spinal column enters the bottom of your skull, is 2.5 centimeters back from where it's supposed to be. It's not at the balance point. And so obviously that gives evidence that the skulls were larger and elongated vertically, and that the foramen magnum was in its position to balance where the skull was supposed to be.
Do you think the later skulls may almost have been an homage?
Emulating the gods.
Absolutely, yeah. Be more godlike. So, that's kind of happening to this day. Eh?
I mean, is there any evidence that the later skulls were of people like of a higher social standing or a higher class, like royalty or the analog of royalty?
Yeah, it was only the nobility that had this happen too. So definitely, and of course, like the originals were natural in shape. Then, as their population began to dwindle, they began interbreeding with normal-looking people, and then as the skulls began to shrink in size, then that's when the manipulation or the binding would start to happen to maintain the look of the original people. Of course, no academic believes this, but I think I've done more work on this than anybody on the planet, so it makes me a bit of an expert on it.
Oh, theoretically, could you trace a bloodline then, and where that original DNA was sort of maintained throughout, and there would be people around today with some level of that elongated species?
Well, unfortunately, what happened was that the famous Nazca lines, the Nazca people moved in from the north, and they caused genocide on the original Paracas people. So when the Nazca take over, the elongated skulls disappear. Their genetic red hair of the Paracas disappears.
Red hair.
And the Paracas were actually the ones who did most of the Nazca line work anyway, not the Nazca.
Red hair, that's interesting, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I was just going to say as well, another thing you said in your video is about sort of, which is something that was completely new to me, is that you can find sort of elongated skulls all over the world. And even, I think you mentioned Akhenaten as well in Egypt.
Well, he's depicted as having an elongated skull, but his mummy's never been found. But yeah, you find elongated skull people in Melanesia. You find them the west coast or western part of Africa, throughout Europe at Stonehenge, all through parts of South America. The Maya had cranial deformation, and also into the United States as well to some degree.
So would I be right in saying that the ones that you find dotted around in various other places are later and therefore deformation rather than the very early ones in Peru?
Yeah, the only ones that that could have been natural in shape are the ones in Paracas, and also in the highlands of Peru as well,
Right.
but also in the area of the Black Sea. So there are a few pictures online. If you put in Black Sea elongated skull, you'll see some photos, but not a lot. I don't think the Russians have done too much in terms of actual analysis of them, but you can find photos of them.
Do you think there could be a link? Because I'm thinking the Black Sea, I mean, if we assume that the Peruvian ones emigrated from the Black Sea area, do you think there's any possibility of a link between the elongated skulls in the Black Sea and the Denisovans? Because the Denisova cave's probably not too far from the Black Sea.
I think the time frame is a lot different, though. The Denisovans died out maybe 40 or 50,000 years ago or more. The Paracas ones date from around 3,000 to 2,000 years ago, as far as we know.
Wow, so quite recent then.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, they're the ones in Peru, the natural ones, for lack of a better word, 3,000 years old.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I just wanted to bring it back to sort of South America. I think this is right. Is something along? It's called is it called the Capac Neon line? It sort of runs all the way up South America into the Americas, and that's where you find a lot of these elongated skulls along that line that runs up sort of like the continent, essentially.
Yeah, it's called the Path of Viracocha.
Right.
And it goes from the border of Ecuador in the northwest down through the southeast, and all of the megalithic sites are located along that line. So you're talking about the Island of the Sun at Lake Titicaca, you're talking Pumapunku, you're talking Tiwanaku, you're talking Ollantaytambo and Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman. And also at all of those locations, they have found elongated skulls that date from, say, around somewhere in the region of around 2,000 years ago.
So is that just pure coincidence that these civilizations would build, near enough in a straight line up the continent, their things? Is that like a sort of the natural, I suppose, surroundings and all the rest of it that would make you do that? Or is there something that we're missing there of why that was done?
Well, it seems to be a band of energy. We actually had some people on a tour with us who were very good at dowsing energy, like earth energies. And
Right.
that's what they said. They said there was a band that was around 100 meters across that went straight down through this line. And on the tour, we followed the line, and they were able to establish at each location we went to, all of these megalithic sites, that there was this band that was going right through it. You have something similar in England called the Michael and Mary lines, which are energy lines too. So
I suppose that potentially kind of fits in with like this idea of frequency and things like that as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when we think of civilizations, we think about building next to water or where the land's rich. But what's so enigmatic about a lot of these structures in South America is they're in the middle of nowhere, or they're halfway up a mountain and seemingly inaccessible. Why build these structures there? And that's, seems a good explanation to me, that there's some significance to this.
Yeah, that's the only place you can build
It
structures
has
of
to
that
be there.
sort.
Yeah. It's absolutely wild. I love it. Brian, we've not done, I think we've done an hour already, Brian. We're going to have to let you go. We could talk to you all night, but you have a life.
That's fascinating, though, Brian. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. It's been an absolute treat, hasn't it?
Definitely, yes.
Is there anything you want to say before we go?
Yeah. Well, actually, why don't you contact me in 6 months and we can do this again?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
I'd love to. Where's your next big trip going to be, Brian? Your next tour?
Egypt in March.
Cool.
Egypt in March. Let's get saving, boys.
Yeah.
Cool. Excellent. Well, there you are. All the links are in the show notes, Eavesdroppers, and the website's up on. If you're watching the video, you can see the website there, hiddenincatours.com. Stay on the line, Brian, for us for 1 minute while we play ourselves out. And thanks for coming. We'll catch you on the flip side. Don't touch that dial.